what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
Footcandle Films. Film news and reviews from two guys who really like movies.
This episode is brought to you by the Footcandle Film Society. For a schedule of upcoming screenings and membership information, visit the Society's website at www.footcandle.org.
Hello and welcome to Footcandle Films here on the Mesh.tv. My name is Alan Jackson and I am the co-director of the Footcandle Film Festival and the co-director of the Footcandle Film Society. With me is Chris Fry, also the co-director of both of the same two organizations I mentioned earlier. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to the show today. Should be interesting.
Yeah, it's a kind of a Halloween episode because I know this is about the time it's going to be coming out and people can listen to it. And we are weaving in a little bit of a Halloween theme on some things. Believe it or not, I know how that's going to fit in with our show. And we're going to have two reviews that we're going to talk about films. One, a fairly new film. That's the film First Man from Damien Chazelle, starring Ryan Gosling. And then we're going to move into a review of a very classic film, something we don't get to do very often, but I'm glad we are doing it for this occasion. The original 1978 Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, mainly because A, it's Halloween time, and B, we know that there's the new David Gordon Green version of Halloween that's coming out here in the next few days as well. So we thought that was a nice kind of lead-in review to get you primed for that remake when it's coming out here. After that, we'll move on to some movie news, and then we'll wrap up the show with a recommendation from each of us of a film we think you ought to seek out or try to see if you're able to. So, Chris, we're going to jump right into our Halloween episode. I am going to make the case that First Man is a bit of a horror movie, so that'll be something we'll tease and we talk about in the review. So that's how I'm tying it all together in our Halloween themed episode for the year. So let's jump right into that first review, which is Damien Chazelle, the director of La La Land, his latest film, First Man.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Be an adventure.
First man to walk on the moon. That'd be something.
We've chosen a job so difficult, requiring so many technological developments. We're going to have to start from scratch.
In First Man, we have a look at the life of astronaut Neil Armstrong as he's getting ready to do his legendary space mission that made him the first man to walk on the moon on July 20th, 1969. You get to see the buildup of some of the events before that. This film, as Alan mentioned, it is from the director who gave us La La Land. And also before that, we had Whiplash and Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, I think is the name of the other smaller film that he made. So considering those first three films and now with this new film, how do you think this fits into the realm of Mr. Damien Chazelle and his filmography?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Whiplash. I think Whiplash is a great film. It was one of my
you and I split on that when we reviewed it on the show.
I definitely liked it more. It was one of my favorite films that year it came out. And I'm high on La La Land, although probably not as high as maybe I wanted to be when I came out of it. It was a good film and I enjoyed it. I felt it missed some marks and I felt like, the first half was relatively strong. The second half was not so much. But overall, I still admired it. I thought it was a great movie. I thought it just maybe was a little overhyped as it came to the point of seeing it at that time. So overall, I'm a fan of Damien Chazelle. I like his work. I was really intrigued by this film when I saw the trailer and saw the announcement because it is really about as different a film as you could make.
I mean, he still incorporates lots of music and disco and stuff from the era, right? No.
Well, there is music, slight use of music, but it's more in the scene music.
Sure.
And there is orchestration.
I'm joking.
Which I'll mention a little bit. So there is a musical element to the film a little bit, but definitely nowhere to the point the previous three films did.
Sure.
This, I really do feel like is about as different a film, both stylistically and tone and everything from his previous works. So I think it's a good entry in his filmography. Although I'll be quite honest in saying the film really didn't work for me personally. And I'll get into some reasons why in a little bit. I think the thing that probably impressed me the most about this film is everything on the technical side. So if you take imagine the Academy Awards and every award category for technical aspects of the film, cinematography, sound design, sound editing, visual effects, all those things. Yeah, this is a great candidate for all of those. And I'm really impressed with the technical nature of the film. It's all the other awards, the writing and the acting ones, I'm going to have a little more concern with, and I don't think work as well within this film. I will say again, I think it was an interesting entry in his filmography because I'm always admiring when directors will do something different than previous works.
Sure.
And he absolutely has done something different. This is a biopic. He hadn't done a biopic before. This is a historical, kind of set in a different time period, which isn't something he's really done explicitly. It's not heavily based in music. It's not a happy film. There's very little joy in the film, and that's actually something I'll get to with some of my concerns, is that I thought it was a very, very morose film, much more than I felt like it maybe needed to be. So yeah, I will say on the likes side, I think it's a technical marvel.
Sure.
I think it's an amazing looking film. I think the realism put into the film in many aspects is amazing. The film stock that was used, the documentary style shooting that went on, all the technical sides I thought were amazing. We'll get to the other stuff in a little bit. So how about you? What did you take away as liking from this film?
I think you and I are kind of on the same page with this film. And, you know, there's the 600-pound or 80 million pound elephant in the room that is expectations.
Yeah.
And although I was not the hugest fan of Whiplash, I definitely admired it. It kept my interest. Guy Man on a Park Bench, that being his first film, yeah, it was okay. And it really gave me like what was going to come down the road for La La Land. And I liked La La Land, I think, a little better than you.
No, actually, I don't think you did.
Really?
I think I was a little higher on it. I know you had some concerns about the repetitiveness of the music and songs and all that.
I guess in retrospect, I've forgiven a lot of that.
Yeah, probably. Maybe our opinions have changed a little bit.
I think they have.
I might actually have seen mine go down a little bit, and yours
mine's
is
kind
going
of
up.
risen
So,
up.
yeah, that may be where it is.
So going into this film, I remember mentioning this film a while back when it was first announced, and I was like, you know, I'm interested to see what he's going to do without his crutch of music, because that's what he's kind of relied on for the first. Not that he's done a good job, but just something that's going to be devoid of it. How is he going to do? And I think you and I are on the same page with, and I guess expectation-wise, this just left me kind of numb.
Yeah.
And I was kind of surprised by that, because his films have always kept me engaged, whether or not I've gone on the ride or not. They've kept me engaged. And with this film, a listener of ours, a friend of ours also, but listener to the show, Brad Haas, was talking about how his reaction upon walking out was it was the longest funeral that he'd ever attended. And then he went on to explain, he said, you know how when you go to a funeral, afterwards, people kind of walked out. They're kind of in a daze, and they've seen something kind of serious, and they've maybe talked to people, but they're all just kind of numbed out. And that kind of, and I was like, you know, that's actually, and he said, and for something like, you know, he said, I understand maybe what the director was trying to go for about all the lives that had been taken and about what was going on in politics at the time. But the guy walked on the moon, and you would think there would be a little bit more kind of jubilation about that, or celebration or something. Yeah. And instead, it's like, it's just focusing on really, as you mentioned, morose, really sad themes. And he's like, that just really, I don't know, it was just very odd. And I think that kind of encapsulates my thoughts. Yeah. And it seems like you're nodding that it kind of hits what you were thinking on too. Just, I can admire it, but I don't know. I feel like it was, I don't know, just it was very interesting take on the first man to walk on the moon.
Well, I said in the intro, half joking but half not, about this having some elements of a horror film. It's a scary film. I mean, there's actually moments in the film where if you have a child that is aspiring to be an astronaut, you may not want them to see this film, because it's actually a pretty harrowing view, I feel like, of the space program at the time. A lot of the anxiety that was going on. Obviously, there were accidents and there were situations, and we lost some people in the program. that's played up and explored for a lot in the film,
Right.
to the point where you never really get a sense of any joy from Neil Armstrong in what he does. Now, I will say, from what I've read and understand about Neil Armstrong as a person, it was pretty much him. He was not a jubilant guy. He was not someone who was going to crack jokes and be light about things. He was a pretty serious guy.
Interesting.
And we do learn in the film very, very early on, not a spoiler, but he and his wife lose a child pretty early on.
A daughter.
A daughter, before a very, very young daughter, before he really gets deep into the space program. So that's carried through the entire film. And I understand that. I don't need the film to be a big romp. And I don't need it to be a Apollo 13, which was tried to play it a lot lighter in a lot of moments and tried to have fun with the film for the most part, except when they were having some issues on the mission. I can get this being more serious and more dour, but I think they just took it too far. I think it was just really hard to come out of this film feeling any emotion whatsoever, other than honestly some anxiety and fear. Because I do think there's the Apollo 10 mission that takes place, of course, before Apollo 11, where there's an accident and it does impact one of his friends, and there are some deaths involved. That scene was terrifying to watch. Even the actual final moon landing, which, again, I don't feel like we're spoiling anything. People know
Someone did land on the moon. Yes.
It's pretty harrowing, getting there. I mean, the point of them landing, I do think the ending moon scene is pretty amazing. And I think it's probably my favorite part of the whole film is that last 10 minutes with him on the moon. But getting there was still pretty darn scary and harrowing. And then, of course, there's a mission he has in between where he's up there trying to do a docking situation with like a little to kind of mimic what they're going to be doing whenever the moon landing happens. And that goes horribly wrong and is extremely scary to watch. So it was a frightening film. It really was.
Which I think it's just not what you expected. And I would echo that. And, you mentioned, unfortunately for me, the accidents are when things are going wrong. That's when I was kind of woken up a little bit, because those instances kind of got you a little bit more engaged. I was surprised that the moon, the actual landing on the moon, getting to the point where they were landing, yes, that, again, you mentioned that it was kind of a tense scene. But once they got down to the moon, I found myself actually really underwhelmed. And I was kind of surprised by that. Now, neither you nor I saw this in an IMAX theater.
Yeah.
And I understand that if you're fortunate enough to get to do that, they kind of change the aspect ratio and then you kind of experience the moon. I think that probably would have helped me
Well, I definitely
a little
think
bit.
it would have been nice to see it that way.
And I think there again, maybe also because I was expecting a little of elation or a sense of achievement.
We definitely didn't get that.
And I didn't get that. And so instead, it was kind of like I was doing a viewing at a funeral. It's kind of like I'm viewing the moon and you're kind of like, okay. And then there's not a lot of music at that point. And there's a lot of shadows. There's not a lot of movement. And maybe realism of what the moon's like.
I think I was more impressed with that moon landing scene because I felt like that was pretty darn authentic.
I see.
It's like, yeah, it's the moon. I mean, you look out and we have become so accustomed to seeing what the moon looks like through photos and videos.
But this would be their first time.
This is the first time. There's never been anybody to actually stand up there before. So the fact that they took so much time, even a shot I just love, I think it's just because it was so precise. He's stepping down off the ladder and his feet are still on the bottom rung or bottom panel of the ladder. He has not technically set foot on the soil yet. And there's a lot of like pause and hesitation, like checking in with the mission controls. Like, okay, I'm getting ready to step out there. And it's like we have to remember, nobody's ever stepped on that before. We assume it's like dirt and soil, but who knows? It could be like quicksand, and all of a sudden they start sinking in. They don't know. Right. So that tension, I thought, was really authentic, and it worked for me. And yeah, it was a little dull on the moon, but that's also kind of how it looks. It's a lot of shadows and it's quiet and you don't really move a whole lot and there's not a lot going on. So I was amazed with how I felt authentic that sequence was.
Gotcha.
That sequence worked for me where not all the other ones in the rest of the film did. It was only about 10, 15 minutes at the most, we had, but we had a pretty long 2 hours leading up to that point. I will say some other things I thought were good. about the film. Even though I said I don't feel like there was a lot of emotion, I don't feel like there was a lot of real, there wasn't a lot of emotions to grab a hold of in the film. Everybody was pretty down, everybody's pretty dour, everybody's pretty serious and focused on what's going on. I will say, though, Claire Foy playing Janet Armstrong, I thought was really, really good.
She was good.
I think she probably, if she had not been as good in her part, I really felt this film would have just sunk anytime you were not in a spaceship. It would have just been a chore to get through. Well, she at least made it interesting and kind of watching a real person reacting to what was going on around her.
When I think I agree with that, and I think there again, expectation-wise, I was kind of expecting this to be kind of a Right Stuff type film, and it wasn't, which I think is good to have your own unique take on the space program and kind of focus on the anxiety and how tough it was and the lives lost. But because of that, there was also, I felt like, a lot less dialogue. And so since everything was such a somber tone and there was not a lot of dialogue, I feel like a lot of scenes just kind of laid there. But you're correct in saying that I feel like when Claire Foy was on the screen, she did speak a lot. She kind of had to bring emotions out of her husband, called him on the carpet about, hey, you better tell your kids you may not come back, which was a really good scene.
It was a great scene.
And I agree that I think she kind of helped certain parts of the movie come alive, whereas otherwise, but it's odd to say, and I think it maybe just has to do with direction and maybe the script and what you're choosing to show on screen, because I remember a film from last year, different time period, or maybe it's 2 years ago, but Dunkirk. And that film was kind of long, didn't have a whole lot of dialogue, but just the way with the cinematography and the way and they did cut between different stories, but just the way that was constructed seemed to move better. And this just, I don't know, it felt every minute of the 2 hours and 21 minutes.
You're right. Dunkirk, there was no joy in Dunkirk either.
No, and so it's not that.
The way the film was put together and paced, you're right. You didn't focus on that. It's like you're going through an experience. There was moments of that with First Man where you're going through the experience. I felt, there's a great sequence when Neil Armstrong and his crew are getting on board. It's the Gemini, as we would call it, but they called it Jiminy. One of the Jiminy missions, where they were going to go up and do a docking situation to kind of go through that and see if they could actually dock with a floating spacecraft up in space.
Right.
And as he's walking to the rocket, there's a scene where he looks up and it's like everything's shaking and they're like these swinging fluorescent lights.
Yes.
And he can look out the window and he saw the other rocket that's been shooting off. Moments like that were amazing because it's like you really felt like you were in his shoes, seeing the things he's seeing and feeling some of that same nervousness he was. So that's where I loved the film, and it worked. But then it's just when they got back home, everything was just so tough to go through and tough to sit through and tough to wait through. And, you just kind of kept waiting for, okay, when are they going to get back up in space again? Because not because I just want everything to happen in space. It's like the stuff on the ground is so dour and just serious. I kind of need more of that energy.
Here's something that I want to ask you about. I've heard people say, you could kind of pair up his movies where Guy and Madeline on a park bench and La La Land, obviously both those are musicals, so those kind of pair together. Whiplash has music in it, but it's about a drummer's obsession, an obsession with music. And you could say with First Man, it's about the obsession of getting to the moon, and with Neil Armstrong's obsession. How do you feel like, well, it's a loaded question, but how do you feel like they did a good job of portraying the obsession with Neil Armstrong?
I don't feel like they did.
And that's, okay, I'm kind of on the same page.
I never really got that sense of him, like what's driving him to want to do this.
I would agree, and I think that's where I stumble with the movie, because if that's what you're doing, then we need to get a little bit more inside the head of Neil Armstrong. And I understand that from what you're saying, accurate, where he kind of kept things at a distance. Yeah. He was Mr. No Nonsense. But then we're not getting enough inside his headspace that we can kind of understand what he's going through. Even kind of some of the threads with his daughter, just maybe the way it was portrayed by Ryan Gosling, who I like as an actor, but there's so much of a distance that I don't know. Well, I can't connect with the character.
No, absolutely. And that's what makes, we were commenting on the scene that Claire Foy had late in the film, where she's basically confronting Neil before he goes on the moon mission about he needs to talk with his sons and he needs to have this conversation. That scene, while it was really good and she was amazing in it, should have been a lot more powerful because we should have had a little more insight as to why Neil was putting that distance and why Neil had the obsession with the moon and how it was impacting his ability to have his family close around him. We understand the death of his daughter early on is still a ghost that's carrying through in the film. We get that. But I just felt like because, like you're saying, we don't really understand his obsession, not obsession, but just his drive to go to the moon. And I don't really understand how his daughter's passing has negatively impacted his relationship with his sons. If I'd known those things, then we get to that scene that we're talking about where Janet is really confronting him, and it's a really well done scene on her behalf. But it should have hit a lot harder. And I think because we didn't have that insight, it didn't.
Right.
And then that all brings me to the very, very last shot, which is basically Neil and Janet. And it's a shot it's a scene that just doesn't work for me because I don't think it earned it. It's a very quiet, serious scene once again. It's the two of them kind of getting to see each other after the moon landing.
Okay.
And where I think there should have been some feeling of emotion in the audience, I don't think we felt anything because
it's when
he's in like a he's
decontaminating.
He's behind a glass wall, and the two come together and get to see each other. It's the first time they've seen each other since he's been gone for, I guess, what is it, a week and a half?
Something like
10 days, something like that was the whole moon mission. And, I understand it being a quiet scene because a lot of stuff had transpired between them before he left, and it's a pretty emotional thing. But I didn't feel anything. And I think that was how the movie ended. Mm-hmm. And that's a tough shot to end on if you didn't build up the emotional investment in both characters. I felt it with her. I got her. I just did not get him.
Yeah.
So,
and such an odd feeling to walk out of the movie. And I feel the people that I was in the theater with, it was kind of the same thing. They're kind of like, okay.
It was almost like you just kind of exhale and like, okay, well, that was something we just watched. It's like, and again, I think when it tries to be a documentary, it tries to be a fly on the wall, it tries to really dig into the procedures and the technical side and the marvel of everything. It's pretty amazing. It just doesn't hold together with what should be more emotion, more understanding and with the characters. I just felt like it just dropped it there. Let me just quickly mention a couple points I've got on things I really liked about it.
Okay.
I mentioned the documentary style shooting and the film stock that was used. It's got a very different quality of look than some of his other films, and actually different than a lot of films we see today. It's the film stock and the shooting style almost gave it a late 60s documentary feel. And I thought that was obviously very fitting. It really just worked. I mentioned about the special effects. This is actually a film, Chris. I don't know how you'll respond to this, but as I'm watching this and watching some of the space scenes, of course, some of the quiet scenes where you've got things floating in space and all, of course, gives you a little bit of a 2001 feel in some moments. Mm-hmm. And it actually got me thinking about how I almost see this as a little bit of a more Kubrick-ish. If Kubrick had to do a biography of Neil Armstrong, this is a lot closer to how I think he would pull it off. Now, I think he would probably do one better, but I think this is more of a style that he would go for.
It definitely has the tone of something like, look at the achievement, but look at the cost. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could definitely, and
just the quietness of things when they're up in space, and it's quiet, and it's more the beauty of things, I got more emotion just when they look out the window and they were seeing things off in the distance or in space. There's a moment where they're waiting to see a connection. They're waiting to see the thing that they're going to be docking to, and they're trying to find it. And if they don't find it, they've kind of wasted the mission, and it's going to be tough getting back. And just waiting to see that in the horizon and kind of the way they framed was really kind of exciting. It was one of the more exciting moments of the film. But it's just that stillness and quietness that was going on, I thought was really... it did evoke some Kubrick-ish type of feelings at times.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I hadn't thought about that, but I could definitely see where that could be said about the film. Kind of a Kubrickian take.
A little bit. If he was forced to make a biopic, which, of Neil Armstrong, I could see it honing closer to this type of tone than maybe other films we could have had. Going back to, again, the horror elements, I already mentioned about the Apollo 10 accident where 3 crew members died inside the capsule before it even took off because of a fire. The way that was shot, in a particular shot we see from the outside of the capsule where the door, after an explosion goes off inside, is pretty darn scary and pretty frightening. There's also a moment, I don't know what you thought about this, but Janet Armstrong, this is after that accident. So they just lost one of their friends and 2 other crew members. And this is someone who lived across the street from them. Mm-hmm. And she's looking out the window on a moment, and she sees the widow, the wife, standing at the back of a car, looking at a trunk, open trunk. And as she's approaching the woman, trying to find out, see if she's okay, we don't know what's going on. We don't know what she's looking at. We don't know what's in the trunk. I mean, it's actually kind of done in a little bit of a building up a horror type of feel to it. And so moments like that were really interesting to weave in the film. It's really just playing up the toll that this kind of program takes. And I think the anxiety that the family members had to live with on a daily basis. So those are all things I admire and I thought did really well. So are there any other things that you had that we didn't mention already?
None that you've kind of ticked off all my check boxes as far as things that I like. And we've talked about our dislikes. I will say one of the things, I guess this is a final like that I had, they did a really good job of showing claustrophobia inside the space capsule, because they would show them kind of wedging themselves in there, then they would tighten all these different things, and then you would see the doors come down and kind of get wrenched closed. And my wife sitting beside me would start shaking her head when that would, because they did that several times. They would show that several times, and she'd just be like, "Nope, nope, nope."
I was the same way. I'm
not a fan of tight spaces like that. And she's like, "No, no, no, no." So I thought they did a really good job of kind of showing you this is how these guys were going up in space, and that was the realism aspect of that particular part of showing claustrophobia. I thought was really well done.
I'll just mention a couple things that didn't work for me. I'm kind of just talked already about the general tone of the film and it not really being an enjoyable film. There not being any sense of joy anywhere in the film, I felt like, to bring out of it. Ryan Gosling, I am still struggling with.
Really?
Yeah.
I like the Gosling.
I feel like he's still playing the same part. I think it's just, I almost get the impression that his mental calculations going on is, how quiet am I to be with this role? I'm either going to be kind of aloof quiet, which is I have felt like how La La Land was. Is like I'm aloof guy. I'm not talking a whole lot, but I'm kind of a little smarmy and all that. But I'm going to scale it way down for Neil Armstrong to where I'm super quiet and I just stare a lot. I don't.
That's his superpower.
It is. And it still doesn't work for me. Unfortunately, his performance, I think, compounded what Chazelle had built with a very morose, serious film.
Gotcha.
Gosling exasperated that with his performance. I think it's just a lot of staring, a lot of just this very forlorn look. I don't know. I think somebody else could have done something a little different with it, where not to give the film more happiness, but that's not what we needed, but more emotion. I think you still could have played emotion even with a guy like Neil Armstrong. So the music, I was curious what the music was going to be like, because I know he brought in the same composer that did the score for La La Land. And, of course, Chazelle is very much a music-oriented director in his previous 3 films. So the score I thought was pretty inconsequential, didn't really do a lot for me. But the one main theme that they kept playing at the film was pretty much borrowed theme from La La Land. There is an actual melody that's pretty much from the soundtrack of La La Land used throughout First Man, to the point where I've heard the soundtrack plenty of times I've got for La La Land. So when they would actually swell up to this point in the music, the main theme, I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally the theme from the closing montage sequence in the end of La La Land. So that was a little distracting too. It's like, all right, how
I did not.
How
pick
derivative
up on that.
did it seem like it was? It did seem like it was a little derivative at moments. So, overall, technically, I thought it was a great film. I think emotionally and story and acting, it didn't work for me. So, I came up very split on the film. Overall, I'm going to say it's not a film for me the way it worked. But I do think if somebody is really interested in the space program, if somebody's really interested in the historical elements of it, and you like the more of the documentary style, let's really just see what it was like. Yeah, it's absolutely an amazing film to see for that. But just don't go in expecting to have anything emotionally pulling you in. You know, everything's kept at a distance. It's a very cold movie. It's a very, we're going to show you what'll happen, but we don't really want you to feel much about it other than feel nervous and anxiety whenever they're doing their missions. So, any other thoughts?
No, I think we're on the same page. I think the acting, I guess maybe of Mr. Gosling didn't bother me, but I think taking it all back, it really surprised me that I came out of it with more of a documentary feel than I did with a narrative film, still about a true event, but I thought I would come away with more of a biopic feel than I would a documentary feel. Yeah. So it was kind of surprising. And I feel like maybe you and I are a little bit more conservative with our praise than I feel like a lot of other critics have been. So it's interesting.
No, and there's definitely elements to praise in the film. I mean,
sure.
If people were to ask me, do you recommend it? It's really going to be a more qualified answer. It's like, well, tell me, does this kind of a film appeal to you? If so, absolutely, you need to go see this. But if you're looking for this isn't going to work for you. Right. I mean, it's really not. If you're looking for a more traditional, I want to feel good about Neil Armstrong and the space program, and I want to get like kind of a charge out of it and see what was going on in history. Yes, I don't think this is for you. But if you just want to see that true, this is what they experienced, this is what it looked like, this is what they saw, this is, kind of a recreation of these things, then yeah, technically it does that amazingly well. So, Okay, well, that is First Man. Interesting feedback and review for us. It's kind of hard to say where we fall on that specifically, but definitely a film to check out if it sounds like what we talked about was interesting to you. So that is playing now in theaters, not doing as well box office as I think maybe the initial estimates were. So I don't know how long it'll be around, but it's a worthwhile entry in Damien Chazelle's filmography, I will say.
And I'll end on this note. I am really, just like when I heard he was doing First Man, I was like, I can't wait to see what he's going to do with that. I am really interested to see what he does next after this because of, will he return to like a musical based film or will he continue to kind of go off the road less traveled in his career? Because he is definitely a very capable director. I feel like he does have stylistic choices in like lighting and cinematography, the people that he uses. So I think he does have a look. He does have technique. I'm interested to see what he does.
Well, and I know we were about ready to wrap this up, but I have one thing I was going to say on that.
Okay.
I did not realize until reading up a little bit more on Mr. Chazelle, because I was curious like what upcoming projects he may have going on. But looking back at his filmography, did you know that as a writer, he wrote the screenplay for The Last Exorcism Part 2.
I did not know
He
that.
wrote the film Grand Piano. Did you ever see that?
I think did we review it on the show?
Like a thriller movie with
Elijah Wood.
Elijah Wood.
Yeah. And I think because at first I thought he also directed that, but then I found out he just wrote it.
He just wrote it. He also did the screenplay for 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Okay, that I definitely did not know.
Yeah. So you look at those projects, and those are all horror/thriller movies. So that actually kind of led a little bit to why I think First Man had a little bit of that more some
dread,
slight horror, dread elements to it.
Okay.
So it's good to know that even though the films we see that he's directed have been more musically oriented, his writing has actually been more in the thriller and horror field. So kind of a blend, possibly to some degree on that. So that was interesting. And the one last thing I'll mention, just I completely forgot. Did you notice it was Patrick Fugit as Elliot, who was the friend of Neil Armstrong? He does pass away again in the film early on.
I saw the name come up. I didn't realize that was I thought he looked familiar,
Almost
but then
famous.
I saw the name come up.
That's you don't get to see him in many things, and now he's probably looks like he's about 40 years old. So it's just interesting to see.
I was also distracted because one of the people in the capsule that lose their life that you talked about because it catches on fire is playing the Riddler on Gotham. So that also
Oh, yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
So
And
it really distracted me.
he wasn't in the film much, though. He was in a pretty short period of time. Yeah. Okay, so that's First Man. I'm officially done now, I promise.
Okay.
So let's move on to our next review, which is, again, a little different for us. We don't normally go back in time and do a review of a classic film, but given the situation, it being Halloween, given the fact that there is a new Halloween coming out from a director that we are kind of interested in seeing what he's doing, David Gordon Green, we thought it'd be fun to go back and actually watch the original 1978 John Carpenter's Halloween.
Halloween. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. I think he'll come back.
Halloween. The night he came home.
John Carpenter's Halloween, Chris, could be claimed as kind of the original masked character, enigmatic character that's going on a murdering spree.
So it predates the Friday the 13th things.
Yes, I believe it does. I think Friday the 13th was 1980, I believe. So it did predate Friday the 13th, obviously way before Nightmare on Elm Street and all these other ones too. This was kind of, in my mind, the original, like where we actually have a unstoppable force, this one character, this one bad creature that's going to go on a murderous spree. It looks like it pretty much started with Halloween, 1978. Okay. It's also kind of the start of John Carpenter, who became a much bigger director over time, doing Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China, The Thing. So he obviously had quite a career after this as well. Even Jamie Lee Curtis starting off with her career as she became kind of known as the Scream Queen for quite a while, because after Halloween, she did 2 or 3 other kind of slasher-based movies that she was the lead female in.
She did sequels for Halloween.
And she did do some sequels for Halloween at some point too. So, this is a start for many paths. It was also a very low budget film. I think it was only done for a few $100,000 at the time, if even that.
Okay.
John Carpenter directing, writing, and I think he did the original music for it as well. It's a lot of iconic things happening in this film. With all that said, all the history behind it, all the, nostalgia, all of the first that came out of this. Chris, let me just ask you, was Halloween scary? Looking at it now?
It's 40 years old.
Yeah.
So if I had seen this film when it came out, I would have been 4, and it definitely would have scared me.
At 4 years old? Okay, sure.
Now I am 44.
Yeah.
So I was surprised at how unscary it was. Now, granted, what is an R film in 1978 versus what is an R film in 2018? Well, huge gap.
Well, there's that, and keeping in mind that, there hadn't really been many films like this at the time.
True.
And people were watching it on a big theater screen, which we were watching it on smaller home screens.
And I think, the most effective tool in the arsenal here, I think, was the music. Mm-hmm. The thing that's really strange to me, like it was striking to me, was how not scary it was. Now, there are 1 or 2 jump scares. There is the setup and scenes of you just see this looming figure of Mike Myers and the fact that they give him this mask, which there again, you got to give it to him. That was before the hockey mask of Jason. So that, there were several really ingenious things they did. However, it just seems they left a lot of potential on the table, which I guess, later in subsequent sequels and other horror movies, they kind of tighten up things and it becomes a higher budget movie and maybe more successful. That being said, I can't dismiss, the acting in this, I guess, low budget. Some of the acting is terrible. Oh, yeah. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Jamie Lee Curtis, I think you could maybe, you surround yourself with people that aren't as good actors, and maybe that just helps make you stand out. Not to say she's perfect in every line delivery, but I just feel like the charisma that she's exuding, you're like, okay, yeah, this girl's going to be big. She can take seemingly lame dialogue, or the fact that she's in this low budget movie, but she's seemingly giving like an Oscar performance sometimes. And one of the times specifically that I'm thinking of, she has this dialogue sitting on a couch with this young boy who, granted, he's a real young kid, so not the best child actor. I don't know what he went on to do. But he's giving her such like flat line readings about being a scared kid, and her responses and how she kind of takes the time in answering and everything, like just kind of a masterclass of good acting, bad acting.
Yeah.
Granted, it is from a little kid, but still, the dichotomy there was really surprising to me that,
when you mentioned the acting, what I think is really interesting is that Donald Pleasance, who at the time was kind of the known name.
And his name comes up in the credits.
Yeah, they brought him up. They brought him in specifically to play the role of Loomis. I thought he was pretty bad. So, it's like they supposedly spent the most amount of money on getting him, and he basically was just brought in for just the days he needed to be there, and he's out.
Well, I think he was good, but I don't think he is. I think I could tell he was a good actor. There's a scene early in the car when he's having this dialogue with like a nurse, and you can tell he knows what he's doing. But I think as the film goes on, he's basically, in one of our recent reviews, you described, I think it was Michelle Williams in Venom as reaching, always thought she had a hand off screen that was ready to get the paycheck and walk off. Yeah. I think that's what Donald Pleasance was doing.
Definitely by the time he got to the town and like looking around, it was ridiculous.
There's a time in the town where the sheriff comes up to him, and Loomis is there looking for Mike Myers, and he says something like, "Oh, what are you doing?" He's like, I'm Loomis." Like he struggles to remember like his character's name. Like, oh, who am I? Oh, yeah, I'm Loomis, and I'm here doing this. I was like, wait, did that just happen? I actually rewound it because I wanted to see that interaction. I'm like,
well, how about when he was like scaring the one kid who was looking in the window? It was an odd performance after you got away from the breakout scene, which I agree. I think he was probably better in those scenes. But
sure.
Anyway, when you talk about acting, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is the only one who really kind of comes out of this thing looking pretty good. So yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Some other things that I'll touch on that because it's 40 years old. We're giving it a hard time, but I want to touch on some things that I did like. I've already mentioned the score. You just mentioned one of the scenes that I thought was pretty effective. It's early on in the movie when they're going to it's our introduction to Mike Myers, essentially. And they're going to the hospital where he's been for 15 years since he stabbed his sister. Spoiler. And they show it, it's a dark and stormy night, which is kind of typical for, for these type of movies. But they drive up to the hospital and you just see this field and you see all these white blurs of, escaped patients just kind of stumbling around.
Yeah, that was a really great shot.
And that's the thing is like that idea to do that, to stage it like that, so effective. I liked the opening credits, which are very simple.
No, yeah.
Orange text on a black screen, but they have this lit up jack-o'-lantern, and the jack-o'-lantern is not even scary. It just has this goofy carved smile on it. But the fact they just maintain this slow push in, and then eventually it does go dark, and so there's not a spotlight on the jack-o'-lantern anymore, and you're basically going into its eye or whatever. Mm-hmm. I thought that was, kind of effective and kind of setting the scene for things.
What do you think of the? Because I personally liked it. The whole point of view sequence at the beginning where we're seeing from Mike Myers' perspective as a young boy, him basically committing his first murder, which is kind of what got him committed. Granted, we see a lot of point of view stuff nowadays, or we have over the last 40 years. I think as being the first time that was probably used in a horror film in that degree, I thought was really effective.
I would agree, and that scene only falls apart for me when he comes out with his the terrible acting parents, the look on the kid's face, Mike Myers. The
last shot is the last shot of that sequence before it flashes forward is unfortunate. So it just did not end that sequence very well. So,
no, yeah. I was also. You talk about how the point of view and like the breathing that you hear of Mike Myers, the tie-in of that as the film closes. You see kind of perspective view from Mike Myers, and you hear this heavy breathing, and that was kind of a nice way to kind of bookend the movie. Something I wasn't expecting for it to be that tight. There's actually a scene later in the film, kind of towards the end, where there were little breadcrumbs dropped about why is Michael Myers doing this. He killed his sister, but during the film you see a tombstone, is taken out, and then there's kind of a reveal that I actually I thought it started off well, where you see one of his victims kind of laying out on the bed, and you see a tombstone above her head, kind of like, I'm kind of recreating, I'm setting all this back up. And I thought that was like, oh, that's interesting that this is kind of, they're actually saying this is what he's kind of been doing the whole movie. I actually liked the initial little bit of setup, but then what goes on to happen is they have these like trap doors opening and bodies falling down. It was kind of like a Scooby-Doo reveal. Okay, that didn't work as much, but how it started off, you come into the bedroom and you see basically this tableau of, oh, he's kind of set this back up because in his mind, this is what's happening. I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting callback. But then it does fall apart.
Didn't quite follow through with it in the rest of the scenes.
No, and I think that's, despite the low budget, this film was pretty ambitious. For its time, being the first slasher movie, something that it doesn't work for me, but I admire what I think they were trying to do. Right after that scene, Michael Myers starts to attack Laurie Strode, played by
Jamie Lee Curtis.
Thank you, Jamie Lee Curtis. She does this kind of stumble backwards, fall over the banister, and collapse downstairs. To me, very reminiscent of kind of the stalker scene in Psycho, kind of like coming out of the bedroom, Norman Bates type thing. And I wonder if they were directly paying homage to that in some way. But the thing is, it's just, I got to give them credit for like, they're just trying stuff and seeing what sticks. That didn't work for me, but when I saw that, I was like, that's interesting, because that's kind of like a throwback and homage that doesn't quite work, but it's ambitious. So.
Yeah, that's the whole thing with this film is I think, for what it was at the time, I think it was a very ambitious film. It was kind of breaking some molds of what people were used to seeing in a horror movie. And I thought all that was great. I will say I didn't find this film particularly scary either, especially by today's standards of what we see. However, anytime we have a shot where somebody is looking out a window or looking down a sidewalk and you see Michael Myers off in the distance wearing the mask, just standing and staring, there were like 2 or 3 instances of that in the film.
There's a clothesline sequence.
There's a clothesline. Laurie's looking from a window down, a second-story window down. There's a clothesline. He's standing there in the clothesline. Very effective shot. There's another one where she looks and he's standing out behind a car across the street, and then he's gone. Those kind of shots were great, and they're the kind of things that when I'm walking out to my car late at night, those are the things that frighten me.
You look for Michael Myers just peeking out.
The idea of somebody being off in the distance, like with a stone cold look or a mask on, staring, it's pretty creepy. So those shots work for me. Those were probably the scariest moments of the film for me, even though they weren't really. They're not jump scares. They're not violent. It's just creepy. So
and interestingly enough, those were the scarier parts of the movie. Like you mentioned, when he's actually in the throes of killing somebody, it does come off as kind of flat. And, maybe they were worried about censors and maybe making it X if it was too explicit with blood or gore or something. But they just seemed kind of hokey. A lot of times he would just end up trying to strangle somebody. It didn't look very convincing. But I will say, one of my favorite moments of the film, and something that just seemed really... I don't know. I was surprised they did it, but I liked it. He does kill one of his victims with a big butcher knife. And that was kind of like, okay, whatever. But he's basically impaled up on a wall, and Mike Myers is just standing opposite looking at him. And then he just tilts his head ever so slightly, and the mask kind of like, Like, it was just it was a moment where they let the camera linger, and he just tilts his head a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting touch there. Again, giving you saying like, okay, John Carpenter, maybe this film's not perfect, but I see that he has a trajectory.
Yeah, right.
He's got some. I guess Jamie Lee Curtis and the director of this thing, I can see they have potential.
Yeah. You definitely see where this could start a mythology from a film like this. So I think it definitely does a great job with that. I feel bad us kind of throwing and bashing a little bit of this film.
But we've said enough that we do like it.
Yeah, I know it's obviously a classic. It's obviously set the standard for so many things. Just
saying how it doesn't really hold up.
Doesn't really hold up. It's a little rough in my opinion. And, I think you could argue that, it's low budget and all, but yeah. But I mean, the things that didn't work for me as well, it was really all about acting and the people they had acting around them.
Sure.
And just some of the scares were not as effective for me. But overall, we had a good time watching it. So
what's kind of interesting to me is, I just recently recommended Night of the Living Dead on the show, and I said, yeah, not really scary, but you think of what they had to work with, and it was low budget, and it was black and white. Making the jump to Halloween, I'm really surprised that this was not really scarier than Night of the Living Dead.
Right,
so
sure.
That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, that is kind of
because this came afterwards, and so but it was did establish the genre, but I'm just surprised that it doesn't hold up as being scary.
I just have to keep reminding myself that if I'm a teenager or a young adult in 1978 going to the movie theater and seeing this without any prior knowledge and seeing it up on a big screen, yes, I do think it would be a much more effective, scarier. Think about it. For example, there's a scene late in the film where it's something we take for granted so much now with the villain, the bad guy, the murderer. We think he's dead, but then he rises up and all it keeps coming back. We kind of chuckle at that now watching a film like Halloween. It's like, oh, look, he's standing up again. Great. But imagine in that movie theater in 1978, I don't think people would take that for granted. I think that would have been pretty. And you get a crowd around you and everybody shrieks all at the same time. Oh, yeah.
Well, and actually there again, giving the movie credit, the build up, sometimes it just happens and you kind of, now you would shrug your head at it or, shrug your shoulders. But then, it would be original. And I give credit to the movie too. One of the times when it happens, they have him in the background with Laurie Strode in focus in the foreground. And you see him sit up, and that was just—it's
like he's just creepy rising from the dead.
It was
a really good shot too.
That was, that's genius. Something else that you give this movie credit for, maybe it happened before this, but people making dumb decisions, and people yelling at the movie screen. That's just now we take it for granted that people are, why go into the scary house? Why go do this? Why do you suddenly decide to make all these bad decisions? I caught myself shouting at Laurie. She would use this knife and then just put it down. I'm like, wait a minute, why are you putting the knife down? When pursued by a killer or when you have a killer anywhere near you, just always keep hold of the weapon. Just don't bother dropping it. Just keep hold of it.
If the killer just dropped to the ground in the room, don't leave the room and go sit on the floor and take some time to kind of collect your breath and and just reminisce about the event you just had when you're still 8 feet away from that, get out of the house, go somewhere else.
Get out of the house, go to get somebody to come in there. Yeah.
It is the quintessential yell at the movie screen that people need to be smarter in the film. So, it may very well have started. I mean, I know some of the old horror films from the 50s and 60s had some of those.
Sure.
But this is the first time I can think of as a true mass killer, unstoppable force, and he's just gonna keep coming and not easy to put down. So you'd like to see the characters be a little more mindful of that in those scenes. So well, that is Halloween. Obviously we've been talking in some of our news sections about the new Halloween film that's coming out now, probably out by the time you're hearing this episode, directed by David Gordon Green, who's a director we've been following for quite a while. He's a North Carolina-based filmmaker, original. So we obviously have some interest in connecting with him there. And we just thought him doing Halloween was a very interesting choice, not the kind of film I personally would have anticipated him doing. So then my understanding is with this film, they have basically cut out and removed all references to the other sequels.
Right.
So this is in their mind, in this timeline, I guess, is the only sequel to the original 1978 Halloween.
It takes place 40 years after the events of the first film.
So very interesting. We'll see how that comes together as a film.
I was pleased to see that, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. You can tell from all the marketing. But the same fellow who is in the original Halloween playing the Michael Myers, which interestingly enough, they credit that as The Shape.
Yeah.
And he is still credited in this film. I forget his name.
Tony Moran.
But they credit him as The Shape. So
yeah.
It's interesting that they're keeping, why don't you just don't say much? But it's almost as if kind of like Michael, or the Loomis guy, Donald Pleasance, he kind of says, he keeps referring to him as kind of like a demon or pure evil. So it's like this guy really isn't Michael Myers anymore. He's just like this entity
Yeah.
that can't be stopped. So it's interesting they credit him as
I never quite
the
understood
Shape.
the reference of calling him the Shape. I'm still not. I need to read up on that, just how that kind of got started.
Right.
Because it's never referred to that way in the film.
No.
But somehow over the course of the films, that's Michael Myers' character has kind of been called the Shape, and kind of in passing. So interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm very curious to see what happens with the new film. And you're planning on seeing it?
Yes. I don't know if we'll review it on the show, but I'm definitely interested in seeing it.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, just anytime you pair an interesting director with an interesting project and you tie into some greater mythology, I think it's always kind of fun to see what happens. So we will definitely be back to review that.
Curious, too, a buddy of David Gordon Green's who's been in some films. He had Eastbound and Down, but Danny McBride is one of the writers on the film, too.
Yeah.
So I'm interested, which... I know him basically from comedic things. So seeing him help David Gordon Green with a horror movie makes me interested as well.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting project. We have mentioned it a few times in our news segments over the episode. So I guess the next time we talk about it will hopefully be a review and we'll see what we thought of it. So,
sure. All
right. So that was our review of the 1978 classic original Halloween by John Carpenter. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got one or two more new movie news items to discuss. And then we will end up the show with our recommendation for the episode. So stay tuned. You're listening to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv.
We'll get back to your show in a moment. Just a reminder, you're listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Find out more at themesh.tv and give us feedback on what you like. And now, as promised, back to your show.
Welcome back to Footcandle Films here on themesh.tv. Again, this is Alan Jackson and Chris Fry, directors of the Footcandle Film Festival and the Footcandle Film Society. And we want to move into some movie news, but before I do, just a couple quick things, little housekeeping notes about the show, just to remind you about this is a podcast that you're listening to on the Mesh.tv network. No matter how you may have got to this episode, whether it's through a web page, whether it's through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, or any of those other services, the great thing about a podcast is that you can choose to subscribe to the show, meaning that every time we put out a new episode, you're going to get it automatically through your platform of choice. Podcasts are free. They're easy to sign up for. You can listen to individual episodes or find the subscribe button on your service. And that way you can be ensured that every time we post a new episode, it is delivered to your device of choice and able to be listened to right away. It's a great format, a great medium for delivering content.
So I know some of you are saying, wait, I'm paying $100 for each of these episodes. You mean I could have been getting them for free?
Yes. Chris,
so
don't tip off the people who are paying.
Start supporting your family and take that $100 and start giving them things and get these episodes for free.
Well, there goes our revenue stream. So, right. Yeah, no, podcasts are a great medium. It's kind of like a DVR for online audio and video content. So we would encourage you to subscribe to podcasts, whether it's ours or others you find interesting anywhere else on the internet. But you can also find some great ones on the Mesh.tv network. So that's THEMESH.tv is the network address, and you can find this show and several others on that podcast network. Chris, I've got a couple of news items. One really just to kind of explore and talk through, and then the other one is a little more of a concept news item I'll describe when we get to it.
Okay.
But I don't feel like we've talked about Star Wars in a while. I think the last, we did the review of Solo a few months ago, but since then it's been kind of quiet on the Star Wars front. But there has been an announcement in the last week or so.
They given us the title yet?
Of episode 9? No,
okay.
It hasn't happened yet. No, what we're talking about is a TV show. So Star Wars has been talking about having a TV show for quite a while. This is beyond the animated shows that they've been having, the Clone Wars and Rebels and so on. This is with live action.
Live action.
Disney is going to be releasing a streaming service pretty soon. And all the Star Wars content is going to be on that streaming service, along with all the Marvel stuff movies and the Disney films. So keeping that in mind. But they announced several months ago that Jon Favreau, who was the actor, but he was also writer and director of Iron Man. Okay. I think director. I think he had a hand in writing it too.
Okay.
And he's also done some other movies. He did, Chef, which we reviewed on this show and both liked.
He did one of the Jungle Book remakes, didn't he?
He did the one that came out, the main one that we've seen. That was the live action, but with the more photorealistic CGI animals.
Right.
So he's had a pretty interesting style director list. But he is tapped as kind of the head guy for a new Star Wars show. He's, I know for a fact, the writer. And I was thinking he was going to be the director of some of the episodes, but I've actually learned now that he's not. He's actually handing that off to some other people.
Okay.
So let me just tell you, the show, they did announce the name of the show and kind of the summary of the show itself.
Cash Grab? Star Wars Cash Grab.
Episode 7.5, the Cash Grab. The show's name is going to be The Mandalorian.
Okay.
The summary is as follows.
That should sound familiar, but I recognize the term, but I don't know what it means.
Well, let me give you the description, and then it'll all come clear. After the stories of Jango and Boba Fett, another warrior emerges in the Star Wars universe. The Mandalorian is set after the fall of the Empire and before the emergence of the First Order. We follow the travels of a lone gunfighter in the outer reaches of the galaxy, far from the authority of the New Republic. So, the Mandalorian...
good guy, bad guy?
Don't know.
But
Boba Fett and Jango Fett were Mandalorians. So, it's in that same vein.
Okay.
But instead of it being one of those two characters, it's a whole new character. But it sounds to be a little bit more of a gunslinger traveling the universe, having adventures or lawlessness, whatever it may be.
So, Mandalorian is just like Klingon or whatever. It's like a race of... Okay.
I believe so.
Huh.
Now... you want me to tell you some things that make it even more interesting as a show? This is going to be an online streaming TV show.
Okay.
So X number of episodes for a season, whatever it may be. Jon Favreau's writing the series, but they are tapping some people to come in and direct different episodes.
Okay.
So I'm going to kind of go from maybe least interesting to most interesting.
Okay.
Deborah Chow, not familiar with her, but she did a 2010 film, The High Cost of Living. Not as familiar with that work, but she's tapped to do an episode. Dave Filoni, who directed the Star Wars Clone Wars movie, the animated movie, back in 2008, will do an episode. Bryce Dallas Howard, the actress, Ron Howard's daughter.
That is interesting.
Will be directing an episode. Rick Famuyiwa, who did the film Dope.
Oh, okay.
Yep, he's going to be directing an episode.
That. Okay.
And then Taika Waititi is going to direct an episode of the show as well. So they're bringing in a really kind of eclectic sense of people to make different episodes.
You know, Disney knows him from Thor Ragnarok, so Taika Waititi is the one thing that's really got me going. I mean, Bryce Dallas Howard, interesting. She's directing, but yeah, that's.
So I don't know if Jon Favreau is going to be directing maybe like the first or last episode or something, and if other people are just coming in to do other ones, but it's starting to take shape. And they did post one image, which was basically a shot of someone who looks kind of like a Boba Fett, slightly different armor colors and all. So it's going to carry that same look of a Boba Fett character, but it'll be somebody else in that Mandalorian race.
Do we know sometime in 2019 or just whenever the Disney streaming service launches?
I think it's probably going to be whenever the Disney streaming service launches, because I think they want this to be like a big reason to sign on to the service. You'll be able to get all your classic Disney movies. You'll be able to get some of the Marvel movies. You'll be able to get classic Star Wars stuff. And, oh, hey, we got this new Star Wars live or a television show.
Oh, that makes me so sad because I've always been so happy about Netflix being my one-stop shop. I don't do Hulu. I don't do HBO Go. I don't do any of that stuff. And I'm not... And, you know, I missed out on the Twin Peaks revival because I didn't do Showtime, which I'm sad about, but I'm just going to end up buying it on DVD. So I guess that's how I'm going to have to end up. If it's any good, I guess that's how I'm going to have to end up seeing The Mandalorian long past when everybody else has seen it. I'll have to get it on that ancient form of media called DVD.
Yeah.
But that's sad because I don't want to pay for another streaming service, because if I start paying for another one, then it's just like I have to pay for all of them. I can't do that.
Yeah. It does start to add up. So it's going to be some interesting choices people will need to make when all these services are available.
Or I wonder if Disney at some point would then let it stream other places, or would they only let it stream
I don't know.
on Disney?
It's really hard to say at this point. So, but yeah, the whole streaming services, everybody wants their streaming service nowadays. So
Yeah, well, I understand it's
Disney, I think, probably has the
revenue.
better chance of being a really popular one, just because I think every family that has little kids and wants all the Disney movies will do it. Any kids, anybody wants the Marvel franchise stuff.
I want
at their
so that's
fingertips.
it's interesting. With this whole Mandalorian concept, the fact that it's streaming, so it doesn't have to be on broadcast, and it's not a movie. But I wonder, but from the directors you've announced, Taika Waititi specifically, and it doesn't sound like they're going to choose to go more adult. They're going to choose to make it more and they have the Clone Wars director, so they're going to make it more kind of adventure, serialized, kid friendly, maybe.
I don't know.
So yeah,
Be very interesting. All we have is the little blurb and the one photograph, and that's it. So
The Mandalorian.
I'm intrigued because I think it could sound like an interesting series. It's the kind of Star Wars story I've been kind of curious to see for a while, which is it's okay to tell us a story that doesn't have to directly connect to Luke Skywalker and
Sure.
Darth Vader. It's okay to tell us about somebody on the far reaches of the universe who's kind of dealing with the whole Empire and Galactic Order thing on the side, but has their own stuff going on. And I think that's kind of interesting to see what happens. Rogue One was probably the closest we got to that, although it was still very tightly integrated with the Star Wars trilogy.
Sure.
But it was the most outside of that, where we had some characters that kind of had their own thing going on.
And I'm one of those people, a lot of people don't like Rogue One. I liked Rogue One.
Yeah.
So
I'm okay with them exploring the universe a little bit more and give us something that just is Star Wars named. It has a look of a Star Wars thing, and there's some minor little connections here and there, but give us something unique and original that we can follow on this. And I think that could be fun.
taking that idea of what you just said, imagine, if you will, the movie Solo, but the character wasn't Han Solo. He was the Mandalorian instead. I think that would have been awesome. The fact that he would, not only did they have to tell a story, but it had to be Han Solo, because the structure, all the stuff that happened in Solo, which I liked it, but I admit there were some problems with it. If it would have just been an outside character that we didn't know, still playing in the Star Wars universe, I think it would have been,
Plus, it would have gone in with very low expectations for people. So I think people might have gone in with a more open mind and been fresh and kind of see it as a brand new adventure and be a little more appreciative of it. So
what I'm curious about, last thing, we could just talk about Star Wars forever, but Rian Johnson, I had thought for a while that, they'd said, congratulations, you did this one movie. We're letting JJ come back and direct the last episode 9. And then when I thought he was then going to be writing some of this TV series.
Oh, he's doing a whole other series.
He is doing
another series of movies.
Okay, but it is movies.
Yes.
So, because it's not TV. He doesn't, obviously, you just announced all the stuff that had to do with this. So it is movies.
It's supposed to be another trilogy of movies outside of the Skywalker.
So I'd heard it, but then I'd heard a TV series, so I was thinking maybe they shifted his focus.
They have a lot of stuff hopping around, but no, I think all those projects are still on the table.
Okay.
They're still talking about doing standalone Star Wars story movies.
Okay.
Just like they did Solo, but they have slowed the production pace
because
of
they're like,
Solo didn't do so well. Then we've got the TV show, which will be kind of the key program on the Disney streaming service. The kind of the big thing that tries to get you enticed to come on board.
Orange is the New Black or House of Cards.
House of Cards was with Netflix
right.
and all. But yeah, Rian Johnson's film trilogy is still supposed to be on the table. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention on the news side, and it's just more of an interesting trend that I don't know if it's picked up lately or if I'm just maybe seeing it more, but seeing several articles in the last couple of weeks about projects that are happening or coming up or being released now, all sharing a common trait. And these are films that are being directed by actors. So we talked about in our last episode, A Star is Born. Bradley Cooper, first time directing a film, I thought did extremely well. So he's now someone I'm curious to see what he directs next.
Okay.
But there's 3 other projects I know of that are either have just come out or close to coming out that are all by kind of fairly big name actors. And let me run through these 3 projects.
Sure.
And I'm just curious is this something we're seeing more of now, or is this something that's always been there? Maybe this whole idea of actors just wanting to become directors. I know we've always seen it.
Right.
I just don't know if we're seeing more of a proliferation of it now, because it seems like every other article I'm looking at films coming up are by actors. So.
Well, I've wondered when Pauly Shore was going to have his debut. So please tell me what he's working on.
We'll get to that on the list. And Melanie Laurent, who Inglourious Bastards, and then she's been in a lot of things since then as well. She's actually directed, I think, 5 or 6 films.
Okay.
So, she's actually done a lot. She's done documentary. She's done, supposedly she did a documentary about climate change. She did a film that was a portrait of toxic female friendship called Breathe in 2014. She's now got a film called Galveston, which is a kind of a true crime adaptation. Nick Pizzolatto, who actually created the True Detective series on HBO.
Okay.
This is an adaptation of his first novel, and it stars Elle Fanning and Ben Foster. So that's kind of interesting. Again, I didn't even know she was a director. So
I was not aware of that.
I was kind of curious to find that out. She's directed 5 features now, which is kind of interesting. So we've got a film like that. We've got Paul Dano making a film. He's got a film that's out now that's called Wildlife. The reviews have not been so good. Say it's a little slow and bland. I'm like, well, it could be Paul Dano in a nutshell. So, sorry.
Wow.
I still having a problem with him as an actor. But Wildlife actually stars Carey Mulligan and Jake Gyllenhaal.
Okay.
And the concept of the film is, I had it up here in a second, following a teenager that grows up in Great Falls, Montana back in the 60s, with the threat of an atomic bomb looming overhead and forest burnings within sight of their town.
So it's kind of it's a period, a little bit of a period piece.
A little bit of a period piece, but it really focuses on
Americana.
this fractious divide between his parents, played by Gyllenhaal and Carey Mulligan.
Okay.
So a little bit of a family drama to it, a period family drama, but the reviews have been not great. Just saying it's very bland and slow and there's not a lot to it. But still, Paul Dano now working his directorial debut, so first film for him.
So you're saving Shore for last, right?
Well, all right, as close as you're going to get to Pauly Shore, which is not very close, is Jonah Hill.
Oh, okay.
Jonah Hill has now made a film too called Mid-90s. Doesn't star any real stars. I think Lucas Hedges is in it, so and Catherine Watterson. So a couple names, but really kids are kind of the main thing. It sounds a little bit like a Boyhood type of film. It's all about taking place in the mid-90s. It's following a group of kids and kind of following along their life at the time. A lot of nostalgia mixed in. It's also Jonah Hill's kind of debut as a director to do this film. So I'm just hearing these stories over and over again. Now that's like 4 in just the last week that we've talked about that are actors doing their first direction, or maybe they've done a few and we're just now finding out about that. What's your gut feel? Is this something that, has this always been there and we've just not really played it up as much? Or do you feel like there's actually a little more proliferation of it now than before?
It's always been around, but I feel like maybe now with the outlets increasing, like Netflix. I mean, you mentioned Bryce Dallas Howard getting to do, granted, it was a streaming TV series for Star Wars, but I think maybe it's increased a little bit now that the number of outlets, it's not just theatrical anymore, but it does seem, just the 3 you mentioned, it does seem like it has increased. So
I definitely feel like it has. There's more and more people coming out as directors that I wouldn't have anticipated being a director. Just from the persona we got to know them from as an actor.
Sure.
But I'm personally always curious about these projects. I love to see how someone who's been in front of the camera for quite a while, each of these actors we mentioned has at least a dozen or more credits to their name acting-wise, and probably a lot more in some places. So to put them behind the camera and to see how they would view it, and plus all the experience they've had working with other directors, now bringing to their own how they craft a film. I mentioned in our review of A Star is Born how I thought Bradley Cooper, it felt like to me, took a lot of David O. Russell's filmmaking style and kind of injected it into A Star is Born. So again, I could see that happening in a lot of other cases with actors as well. So I personally am really curious. These are all projects I'm going to be watching now to see if any of these emerge as true filmmaking talents, or if it's more of just something, an itch they needed to scratch. It's like, I just want to have one director credit to my name.
And the one that I can think of in the past that did have success, but not in his personal life, would be Mel Gibson. He came off and he did Braveheart. He did Passion of the Christ or The Passion, and then he did Apocalypto, and I think after that maybe he's had another one, but it's like, he did have great success after being an actor for a while, so it'll be interesting to see. It doesn't sound like Paul Dano will be getting
not from
nominated
the reviews,
for
anyway.
But
Melanie Laurent and Jonas Hill have actually gotten pretty good reviews, but Paul Dano not so much the first time out.
But hey, who knows?
Well, yeah, you got Mel Gibson. I know, of course, you go all the way back to like Robert Redford, becoming a director and kind of a well-known one for a while. There's a lot of examples, I realize. It seems like there's just a lot.
Seems
more
like the frequency right now.
But I think you're right. I think it's the number of distribution channels and the opportunities that, all these streaming networks and other places are looking for to make a film, and taking a known quantity like an actor and putting them behind as a director is probably a good selling point too.
Well, and good selling point, and as well as, okay, they're starting something, they have this streaming service. They know instead of paying 15 actors, they're like, well, this person has mentioned they want to get into directing. Everybody knows them as an actor, but it's kind of like, we'll you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We'll let you come get your first directing job, but we get the buzz off your name.
There could be some of that too.
So, you never know.
Interesting. All right, well, that's our movie news for the episode. Mainly just wanted to talk about The Mandalorian, but we're going to kind of keep an eye on some of these projects coming up from actors turned directors as well. So, Chris, let's go ahead and move into the final segment of our show, which is our recommendations. This is where Chris and I both come up with a film that we either recently caught back up with or got to see or maybe remembered having seen in the past that we think is just worth people checking out, and we want to recommend it to you. Normally, we like to say that the films are ones that you can find online, available. I will go ahead and say mine at the moment is not. You will have to seek it out a little bit more. If it's okay, I'll go ahead and jump into mine. So let me go and tell you about my film recommendation. It's one that I got exposed to just a few days ago. We had the opportunity here in our area to help host a screening. It was put on by the Morganton Film Society down the road from us, but we kind of helped promote it as well. It was a documentary called Bisbee 17, directed by Robert Greene. And we actually got to have a Q&A with Robert Greene by Skype afterwards. He was hoping to join us, but was not able to due to the Hurricane Michael storm that was knocking out a lot of flights. But this film, Chris, I think I texted you afterwards, and I think I referred to it as the reverse American Animals. And there's a reason for this.
This is an interesting statement to me.
Yeah, this is a documentary, but it's a documentary that, and this is much of what Robert Greene has done previously in his work as well. It's a blending of a narrative elements into a documentary style movie. He previously did the film Kate Plays Christine, which was chronicling a real life situation, a real thing that happened, a real event. This is the woman Christine that killed herself on air, as a newscaster. But he was following, as a documentary, a woman who was going to be preparing to play Christine in a recreation or film her on her own. So this is a style he's kind of adapted, and it's very evident here in Bisbee 17 as well. The story behind this film is there's an old mining town on the Arizona-Mexico border that 100 years ago had a mass deportation of 1,200 immigrant miners out of the town.
Okay.
It was done in a very public way. Basically, the sheriff at the time felt that there was a union starting within the miners, which there was, but he was telling everybody in the town that the union was going to basically cause bloodshed on the streets and was going to revolt.
Okay.
So he deputized many, many people in the town to go and round up these immigrants, these miners that he felt like were part of the union. And it didn't matter. If it was, they knew that person was in the union, they knew that person was sympathetic to the union or had any support for the union, they rounded them up.
Okay.
Round them all up, march them down to the ball field in the middle of town, and then load them up into trucks, and they drove them out into the middle of the desert.
Wow.
And dropped them off and said, if you ever come back to this town again, we'll shoot you on sight.
Wow.
1,200 people for a town that was not but a few thousand people to begin with.
So all men or women, children?
No. Combination of all.
Okay.
So what this documentary is about is it's people starting to come to grips with this part of their history because this is supposedly not something they've talked about in the last 100 years.
Okay.
The townspeople, it's a great little town. They show you the town seems pretty awesome, but there's that dark secret underneath it. So now it's 100 years. There is a committee that's starting to put on some acknowledgement of that event. Kind of from a historical standpoint, they're going to have a ceremony and they're going to have an event to kind of commemorate this event, this thing 100 years ago.
Gotcha.
Well, Robert Greene actually and his crew went in and they got the town interested in the idea of doing a recreation of this deportation process. So they actually had townspeople play the roles of some of them as the people who rounded up the immigrants, other people playing the immigrants who got rounded up, and actually stage everything. So through the course of the film, you see this recreation, and it's truly...
So it's not the build-up, it's kind of spliced in.
It is spliced in throughout as we lead up to the film, but it all culminates with the actual rounding them up in the ball field and then putting them in the trucks and driving them off.
Gotcha.
Here's what's really interesting in the film. So it's a documentary about this town coming to grips with this event, but also how they're going to stage this recreation. So you've got some town people who are being given the role of someone who's going to go round up the immigrants. And there's one case in particular, one gentleman where we learned that his father, I think, was someone who did round up the immigrants back then, or grandfather,
great-grandfather or something.
Somebody further up in their lineage.
Right.
So now he's having to play that same role and kind of how he deals with that and kind of what kind of mental, emotional impact it has on him. There's a lot of little interesting stories like that. The main character we follow, who's meant to be one of the immigrants who comes to town and learns about the union and then decides to stand up for the union. We kind of follow his story.
Gotcha.
But it's acted by a kid, a young guy, who didn't know anything about the story. Okay. He was basically said, hey, I want to act, and they let him have this part. But he himself is an immigrant, and he has his own past history with immigration issues too. So watching them all kind of understand what this event was about and how it now impacts them personally, and then watching this recreation, man, it's
Sounds
a really,
fascinating.
really good film.
Sounds good.
So it just will cut in between behind-the-scenes documentary telling the story and then the actual acting that these guys are doing to put on these scenes. And man, it's a really, really good film. So Bisbee 17, highly recommended for me. I think it's definitely something worth exploring, discussing, sharing. Very, very creative documentary film. And just for an event that, you just kind of have a hard time believing that a town in America in 100 years did that kind of thing.
Sure.
And of course, also all the echoes it has now to immigration issues and discussions that are on the public stage now really kind of tie that in and make that even more impactful. So Bisbee 17, it is something you have to seek out because it's not available online or anything yet. It is playing in select cities now as we write this. It is having a kind of a limited theatrical run in certain independent cinemas. So, but please keep your eye out for it. It's worth seeing. If it comes to near your city, I'd recommend going to check it out. Or hopefully it'll be online available within a few months. So.
Yeah, Alan spoke to me about it. I didn't get a chance to catch the screening, but then I went online trying to seek it out, and through a website for the film and through other things, I noticed that, it is kind of playing like a limited theatrical. There's some smaller art house cinemas are kind of hosting screenings and stuff. So there's a chance you can still catch it on the screen. But if not, you can be like me and wait for it anxiously to show up on iTunes or Hulu or something.
All right. Well, what's your recommendation, Chris?
So my recommendation is actually going to tie back to both things that we've mentioned in the show, both Halloween and First Man, because like First Man, it is kind of a biopic, but it's much more traditional in a sense that it's the film Stronger that came out in 2017, and it tells the true life story of Jeff Bowman, who was a person who got injured in the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013.
Oh, right. Okay.
Jake Gyllenhaal plays Jeff Bowman, but it's directed by David Gordon Green, who is directing the new Halloween that's coming out. So that's how it kind of ties into that whole discussion. I saw this film, and it kind of came and went in 2017. Wasn't really a lot of fanfare. Yeah. But of course, I sought it out because it was by David Gordon Green, who I try to watch most of what he does, and I really, really liked it. It's kind of in an interesting take on the First Man aspect, where they kind of pare down a lot of emotion, and it doesn't end up becoming cold and not really working for us. This kind of pare down what you could assume would be a lot of anti-terrorist rhetoric, or kind of patriotism type stuff, and you would think would overwhelm a movie like this. And it doesn't. It just really gets simplified towards this is something terrible that happened to this guy and how he kind of comes to terms with it physically and emotionally.
So he really keeps the focus on him.
On him,
okay.
Correct.
Good.
And I thought it was really well done. And like I said, Jake Gyllenhaal does a really good job. And his girlfriend, played by Tatiana Maslany, I think I'm saying her name correctly.
Yeah, she's good.
She's also really good.
Yeah. You've never seen the show Orphan Black, have you?
I have not. I have heard of it. But
she's good in that.
She's good in that. But this is a kind of a smaller film that came out and went in 2017. But I think it's pretty good. And by the director of the new Halloween. So Stronger is the name of it.
And that's one, when it came out, I didn't have a lot of interest because Jake Gyllenhaal, I was still trying to decide if I liked him as an actor or not. And plus the top, it's just, I think it was coming out the same time some other
I think there's one called Patriot Day or something that was more of a dramatic recreation of the event of the bombing. Right. So, I think
this probably got lost in the shuffle just from a scheduling and release schedule. But I did hear some good things after the fact. So I'm glad you got a chance to catch up with it and can recommend it as well. All right, great. Well, that is our show. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So we talked about the film First Man with some very split feelings about the film. And then we also discussed the original 1978 Halloween, which we both find to be dated, but we can acknowledge and respect the craftsmanship that went into it at the time.
And I think it's worth checking if you've never seen it.
Oh, well,
I think it's worth checking out just because of the historical aspect of it. And it still doesn't hold up, but there are aspects of it that are pretty ingenious for the time.
There are some moments. And then we also did our news items, and then we closed out with our recommendations. With Chris had the film Stronger, and I had the documentary Bisbee 17. So, Chris, people have listened. They heard us talk about Halloween, and they're just incensed right now because how could we possibly throw any shade towards the original Halloween, the classic that it is? So somebody wants to chew us a new one. How would they go about doing so? Do we want to encourage them to do it? And then B, if they do, how would they do that?
Sure. If you want to rush to the defense of Halloween, you can send us an email at info@themesh.tv and mention Footcandle Films in the subject line. And we'll try to respond to you, or, who knows, we may dialogue with you over the show. Also, Alan has mentioned how we are co-directors of both the Footcandle Film Society and the Footcandle Film Festival. I would be neglecting my duty if I didn't say submissions for that festival, which will be in 2019, the next one. We actually start accepting them November 1st.
God, is it that time already?
So, we're coming towards the end of October, so that means submissions will open up for the 2019 festival. So, to do that, you just we accept submissions through Film Freeway. So, if you're a filmmaker and interested in submitting, there you go.
All right, that's great. Well, that is our show then. I thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate the listening and the feedback and the support of the show. And we will look forward to sharing some more film discussion and reviews with you next time.
See you in the ticket line.
Special thanks to Carpal Tuller for the show theme music. For more about Carpal Tuller, visit www.carpaltuller.com. You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.